So Apple's just made it official, the M5 iPad Pro is here, and this, my friends, is one of those classic Apple refreshes where you might have to squint to tell what's changed, but under the hood it has some pretty solid performance upgrades. The M5 chipset's now inside, the base configuration finally gets 12 gigs of RAM, and the GPU takes a big leap forwards. But the big question is, does that make it worth upgrading from the M4? Or more realistically, should you now just grab an M4 iPad Pro now that it's about to drop in price? Let's break this down, because while the M5 iPad Pro may sound like a small update, it does actually reveal quite a bit about where Apple's heading next. Now first things first, let's talk about what's new. The big headline here, of course, is the M5 chipset. Built on TSMC's 3rd generation 3nm process, the M5 promises both better efficiency and performance. Benchmarks show the CPU is about 12% faster than the M4, which on paper doesn't sound huge, but it's the GPU where the story gets more interesting. The M5 features an upgraded 10-core CPU with dynamic caching improvements, and benchmarks show 36% better graphics performance compared to the M4. That's a pretty substantial leap, and for people working with heavy 3D workloads, rendering, or even gaming, yes, there are serious iPad gamers out there, that's a real step up. But for most using the iPad Pro day-to-day, note-taking, drawing in Procreate, editing photos in Lightroom, or cutting clips in Final Cut, the M4 was already blazing fast. So what we're seeing here is more of a future-proofing play rather than a revolutionary upgrade. Oh, and before we go further, if you're enjoying these deep dives into Apple's latest releases, make sure you hit subscribe and tap the new hype button. It generally helps a small channel like mine reach more people, and I appreciate every single one of you guys who supports these videos. Right, now let's talk about the one change that I think Apple fans will quietly appreciate the most: RAM. Apple's finally giving the base iPad Pro 12 gigs of unified memory, up from 8 gigs on the 256 gig and 512 gig variants of the M4. It's a small but meaningful improvement, especially for multitasking and creative workflows. On iPadOS, that extra memory helps keep more apps suspended in the background, reduces reloads, and boosts performance for heavy creative apps like DaVinci Resolve or LumaFusion. This move also lines up with what Apple did last year on the MacBook Pros, where they got 16 gigs of RAM by default, so the trend is clear. Apple's base configurations are getting a nice bump in memory across the board. And honestly, this was long overdue. The M4 iPad Pro with 8 gigs was already great, but I'm sure for power users there were moments where it felt like it was brushing up against memory limits, especially if you're working with multiple 4K video layers or switching between complex apps. You also now get the N1 chip from the iPhone 17, which enables Wi-Fi 7, Bluetooth 6 and Thread support, and also on cellular versions, the C1X modem from the iPhone Air, which offers 50% faster data. Also, memory bandwidth exceeds 150 gigs per second, storage is up to 2 times faster, and now it also supports external displays at 120Hz with adaptive sync and fast charging to 50% in 30 minutes. So those are pretty nice changes. Pre-orders, by the way, begin right now, and the iPad's in stock October 22nd. Design-wise though, nothing's really changed. The color options are the exact same, and they didn't even bother changing the wallpaper. The only visual difference is that it doesn't have the iPad Pro inscription on the back anymore, but otherwise it's hard to tell this apart from the M4. And that's not surprising, because the M4 iPad Pro completely reinvented the look and feel of Apple's flagship tablet earlier this year. It's still the same ultra-thin design, 5.1mm for the 13-inch model, which is still thinner than even the iPod Nano was, and that design still feels impossibly futuristic. You still get the tandem OLED Ultra Retina XDR display, which remains one of the best panels ever put on a portable device, black satin key, brightness peaks up to 1600 nits for HDR, and it's just stunning to look at. So yeah, if you were expecting a redesign, a second USB-C port, or any sort of hardware surprise, this isn't that launch. It's Apple keeping the exact same body, display, and accessories, and just swapping in a faster chipset. Which, to be fair, is what the M5 cycle was expected to be. Speaking of accessories, the Magic Keyboard and Apple Pencil Pro both remain fully compatible, and I'm actually glad Apple didn't introduce yet another round of accessories, because at this point, the ecosystem's in a good place. The new pencil hover feature, barrel rotation, and haptic feedback still make it feel incredibly advanced, and pairing that with the M5's GPU improvements and additional RAM means we'll likely see drawing apps start to use that additional horsepower over the next year. I'm guessing more RAM allows for more layers in some apps. So performance and memory, those are your tangible upgrades, but what's the overall experience going to be like? Well, the truth is the M4 was already fast enough for most that they're not going to feel much of a difference in normal usage. Opening apps, swiping across the UI, multitasking, it's going to be nearly identical. Now let's talk about pricing, because this is where things start to make a lot more sense. The M5 iPad Pro starts at the same price as the M4 did, $999 for the 11-inch and $1299 for the 13-inch. But here's the interesting part, with the M5 model now official, the M4 iPad Pro is about to get much cheaper. While Apple won't directly be offering any discounts, third-party retailers are already discounting M4 models, and that makes the M4 an incredibly good deal right now. Remember, you're getting the same exact design, the same OLED display, the same accessories, just with the M4 chip instead of the M5. And the M4 is still an absolute beast. It's overkill for most users and will easily last for the next 5 to 6 years. So unless you really need that additional GPU performance or the 12 gigs of RAM, the smarter buy right now is probably the M4. However, I'm glad that Apple gave us a performance increase without a price increase. Now if you're coming from an older model, say the M2 or even the M1 iPad Pro, the jump to the M5 is going to feel significant. You're getting that OLED screen, the thinner and lighter design, and a massive leap in power, but if you already own an M4, I honestly would not recommend upgrading, and I guess most on the M4 wouldn't have considered upgrading immediately anyway, since most keep the iPads for years. In fact, I think the M5 refresh really highlights how mature the iPad Pro has become. Apple's no longer trying to reinvent the wheel each year, it's refining a product that's already hit its design peak. The M4 redesign was a generational reset, the M5 is more of a technical polish, and that's not a bad thing. It just means we've entered the incremental era of iPad updates again, where you'll see consistent year-over-year improvements, but no huge reinventions. A similar thing happened right after the 2018 iPad Pro launched, the last big redesign. Of course, power users who do push their iPads will appreciate the performance upgrades, no doubt. The M5 does make the iPad Pro even more capable for sustained workloads. With the improved efficiency of the 3rd generation 3nm process, you will see slightly better battery endurance in heavy activities like 4K video editing or AI-based photo processing. The device runs cooler and maintains peak performance for longer. Apple's been refining its thermal management across the iPad line, and the M5 continues this trend. It's subtle but noticeable over long sessions. Also, with Apple Intelligence becoming a bigger part of iPadOS, having the additional RAM on the base configurations may come in handy for AI-related activities, and it's great this iPad isn't being left out, and it is being upgraded with the latest silicon alongside the Mac. But until that future arrives, this is an if you need it upgrade, not a you must upgrade one. And in a way that's refreshing, because it means you can finally buy an iPad Pro and know it won't be outdated 6 months later. So here's my honest recommendation: if you own an M4 iPad Pro, keep it. It's still one of the best tablets ever made, and the M5 won't change your experience in any meaningful way. But if you're coming from something older, you can consider this, but I would ultimately recommend finding a deal on the M4 because it's the smartest purchase in my opinion, especially considering it's going to be considerably less for 90% of the same experience. The M5's improvements are nice to have, but not must-haves. And that's ultimately the story of the M5 iPad Pro. An iterative upgrade that cements Apple's position at the top of the tablet market, but also one that shows how mature this category has become. We're at a point now where Apple doesn't need to blow us away every cycle, they just need to keep refining, and they're doing that pretty well. Still, it does make me wonder, what's next? Maybe the M6 iPad Pro will bring a second USB-C port, maybe next-gen Siri will elevate the experience further, or maybe we'll see the first foldable iPads, something Apple's reportedly been experimenting with behind the scenes. Either way, the M5 feels like the calm before the next big wave. So that's the new M5 iPad Pro, faster, more memory, same stunning design, and quietly preparing Apple's most powerful tablet for the next chapter. If you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to subscribe and hit the hype button. It genuinely helps a small channel grow, and I've got plenty more Apple coverage coming your way. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.